It's the Worth Knowing live stream. I'm Matt Robison, and I think you're going to finish today's show convinced that as much as we all think we know the story of Jeffrey Epstein, we really don't. At certain points, even I've said, look, I know he's evil. I know Trump is all over that story. Let's move on. But I think that's missing something critical. As much attention as it's gotten in the media, in politics, in the courts, the horrible nature of the headlines involved is probably hijacking our brains and diverting us from the deeper issue. Because Jeffrey Epstein's story is usually told as a sex trafficking story, and it is. But today's guest is arguing that there's a bigger picture going on that may be the most important part. Epstein was, at his core, a fixer, a connector, a money mover. His real business wasn't the obvious crime of trafficking girls. His real business was dirty money, finding it, hiding it, protecting it, shuttling it from one shadowy recess to another. Along the way, he sat at the intersection of intelligence agencies, organized crime, elected leaders, business moguls. In short, the most powerful people in the world, and he made himself indispensable to all of them. There was a web of secret money and immense power, and he was the spider sitting in the middle. And yes, of course, this involves Russia. At some level, the press seems to be aware of this, but still, what's most underreported is how deep the Russia connection goes. We're talking about the Russian mob, Russian intelligence, and a web of relationships that connects directly to Donald Trump, and that may explain why Trump has been so desperate, why his FBI director, Kash Patel, has spent so much money to keep his name out of those Epstein files, not because of the trafficking, because of the money and the Russia connections. Just for example, there were over $1 billion in suspicious transactions on just one of Epstein's bank accounts. The sex trafficking, as horrific as it was, may have been for him a sideshow to the real operation, which was moving dirty money across the many accounts that he touched. Why are we bringing this up? Well, for one thing, today's guest has written a whole book about it, which is building on a deep dive Substack that he did at the end of last year. And so we're going to get into all of that. But it's also worth talking about right now because the fight to protect this deeper story is still unfolding. Thomas Massie, the lone congressional Republican fighting to make the Epstein files public, was just drummed out of office by a wave of Trump money and influence. And those Epstein files are still being actively suppressed. Kash Patel authorized $850,000 in FBI overtime specifically to redact Trump's name. The legal deadline for releasing the files is passed and media attention's waning. Things are being buried in real time. So this isn't a cold case. This is live. And all of this matters because the defining political issue of our time has become corruption, a kind of corruption we've never seen before, not just because of its scale, but because of its widespread acceptance and the way it's embedded in every aspect of our government under Donald Trump. People have been warning about the danger of America becoming an autocracy, and maybe we will. But first, we seem to be going through a larval phase of becoming a kleptocracy. That's what we need to understand, and that's what we need to fight against. My guest today has been investigating this story longer and deeper than almost anyone. Greg Olear is the author of the Substack Prevail, and his 4-part series, Infrequently Asked Questions about Jeffrey Epstein, has gone viral for breaking new ground on exactly these connections, and it's becoming a book. So let's talk about where Epstein really came from, who made him, how he built this network, what Russia has to do with all of it, and what's actually in those files that Trump is so desperate to hide. Greg, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you. And let's get right to the key issue here. Most people think of Epstein as a sex trafficker. He is, and we want to acknowledge up front, as you do very clearly in your Substack series, that no one is taking this with less than the gravity that it deserves, that aspect of his horrible crimes.
Yes.
At the same time, you're arguing that he was something much bigger and much more dangerous than that on a global scale. So for people who haven't read your series and who are going to read your book, what was he really?
The first thing is that we're still not 100% sure. So let's start there. We're going by stuff that we know. We're going by stuff that we've learned. And I wrote this series and this book it's set up as a Q&A. And it's set up that way because this guy just brings up question upon question. And we try to answer the questions the best way that we know how. with the information available to us. You did a very good job explaining it at the beginning, I think, of what he was, as I understand him, which is he's the ultimate man in the middle. He's a guy that connects powerful people to other powerful people, whether they're in intelligence services, whether they're in the British royal family, whether they're in big tech, whether they're in finance, all kinds of things, whether they're Woody Allen or legal people. He knew
only the best people.
Only the best people, just a staggering amount of people. And how does something like that get developed over time and through trust washing? But he started off, as everybody knows, he was the teacher at Dalton when he spent, I think, a semester or two at Cooper Union, which is a very good school and hard to get into, by the way, in New York City. And there's a lot of this, Bill Barr's father hired him because I don't know. Bill Barr's father, Donald, who did work in intelligence, did work with the OSS, was actually not at Dalton at the same time that Jeffrey was. Maybe he hired him. Maybe. We're still not 100% sure. So I think that connection is a little bit overblown. But then he leaves there and goes to work at Bear Stearns. And at Bear Stearns, he ingratiates himself to Ace Greenberg, who's the head of Bear Stearns, this maverick guy, interesting guy. One thing that Epstein was really good at was ingratiating himself with older, very rich men. Who's very good at this. He did it time and time again to lots of different people.
So the origin story here is, for people who don't know, Dalton is an exclusive private school in New York City. I come actually out of that world. So does Cliff Scheck. Cliff and I met in high school at a rival prep school.
You can say better. You can say better. It's okay.
Better. I was a little bit like the Chris O'Donnell character in Scent of a Woman. I was a scholarship kid who found myself in the midst of all of this wealth and privilege and connections. I'm at high school with Rupert Murdoch's son and the heir to the Calvin Klein fortune and a million other ultra wealthy scions of great fortunes. And I found myself in this. And what you're saying, and this is the very last comparison to Jeffrey Epstein and myself I will ever make in my life. I promise. But you're saying that Jeffrey Epstein also bumbled into this world at Dalton as a teacher, but then he leveraged it. He used it to make his way upward. Let me fast forward in this story just a little bit, because one thing you point out brilliantly in your series is that the density of detail of this story is in itself a barrier. It's very hard. You even share the acronym MEGO, my eyes glazeth over, because you're talking about a system that's meant to obscure dirty money, secret wealth, power. That's the whole point of it. So would you just give me the headline version for if there's one thing that you wish people would take away from this conversation and eventually reading your book, what would it be?
Okay, good question. First of all, MEGO is from Brooke Harrington's book, Offshore, which everybody should buy and read immediately. So shout out to her. The one thing that's I'm going to go with the thing that's the most underreported. And I think people know that, obviously people know he worked at Dalton and people know that he was with Les Wexner and what happens sort of after. But that middle period of time, especially in the 80s, is super important and nobody really talks about it that much. So after he left Bear Stearns he got in a fight with the SEC because of this. He started doing offshores and stuff like that and moving money to tax havens and this and that. He went to work with this guy named Douglas Leese, who was a British guy, arms dealer, probably worked for MI6. And he met him, his girlfriend at the time went to a party and knew Doug Leese's son. And then he wound up in London. And like I said, Jeffrey Epstein, very good at getting older men to like him. And Doug Leese hired him. And he was working with Doug Leese during that time period in the 80s when, first of all, Iran-Contra was happening. And second of all, the Al-Yamama arms deal, which is a huge arms deal between the British government and Saudi Arabia, was also happening. So these things are happening at the same time that Epstein is working for Doug Leese. Sunday Times has an article about this where they basically say, yes, Leese mentored, that's the word they used, Epstein at this time. This is a shadowy guy. There's one picture of him on the internet. His son writes something in the birthday book, Nick. It's a kind of dirty story in the birthday book. But Doug Leese, during this time period, there's not that many people that are doing like arms deals that have ties to all these different intelligence agencies. So right off the bat, There he is. Right off the bat, Epstein, he's working presumably with British intelligence. He's working presumably with Saudi intelligence. He's working presumably with US intelligence and Israeli intelligence, because that's part of that Iran-Contra as well. So that's all these different intelligence agencies. And this is not a big world. It's not a huge group of people. These little niche industries, if we could even use that word, people know each other because there's not that many people. The guy who was in charge of Israeli military intelligence in the middle of the 80s during this Al Yamama arms deal was, you want to guess? I think you know.
I think I do. Does
Yeah.
it rhyme with Ehud Barak?
It does. It does. Because you always hear this guy mentioned as the former prime minister, which he was. But before he was the prime minister, he ran the intelligence agency, right? So when people like the New York Times are like, oh, there's no ties to Epstein and intelligence. Sometimes the congressman will say that. It's like, what are you talking about? Just him knowing Barak and hanging out with him as much as he did, that's an intelligence guy. So he comes out of this world in the 80s. That's what sort of forms him. That's where he makes his connections. Remember, they found like weird passports. They found like a Saudi passport and stuff like that when they searched this. That all comes from this time period when he's traveling around and he's meeting people. And I suspect, I don't know, he was important because he knew how to move money around and hide it. He was good at, if you're going to pay somebody $5, you could just put it in an envelope, put it in the mail. If you're going to pay someone 500 million bucks, that's a little harder to manage.
That anticipated my next question, which was, how did this guy what was the movie with Matt Damon as like a grifter on the make?
Rounders?
Gosh. No, he was working his way up through a world of wealth and privilege. Anyway, I'm having half.
Ripley. Yeah.
Dangerous. Right. But this was sort of his thing. And I was wondering, how did he get embedded with all these intelligence? First of all, let me just say as an aside, that for anyone who's ever worked in government, I know some of our commenters here, the Cynthia Rice is here, has worked in government. If you've ever done a background check, if you've ever been a reference for someone else, there are several questions that you get asked. And one of them is about the potential intelligence contacts, the potential foreign government contacts that person may have had. I absolutely co-sign your assertion that being friends with, palling around with Ehud Barak would represent a potential source of compromise and intelligence contact that would be considered as such at the time by the FBI and the American government. So yes, that is 100% true. But it sounds like what you're saying is, through this lease connection, through the Bear Stearns work, Jeffrey Epstein developed this ability to move money, hide money, find money. And that's what made him valuable to intelligence agencies. Is that right?
Initially, yes. I think initially that was the thing. This is what I suspect. This is my speculation. There's plenty of evidence to suggest it. I'm not pulling it out of nowhere. And then I think over time that morphed into different things. Clearly, he was a guy that people liked talking to him and liked learning what he thought about things. There's a narrative out there that he was dumb and all this thing. I don't think he was dumb. How could he possibly? He's got molecular biologists extolling his genius. He wasn't stupid. So I don't think he was quite as smart as all that, but he clearly knew what he was doing in certain ways. And I think that it's hard for people when you get to that level of the mountaintop to meet each other and to network the way that they want to network. Because when you're the president, let's say, you're constantly being recorded. People are around you all the time. You're just basically in public all the time. So how do you go from that place to meeting somebody else, either secretly or otherwise or whatever? It's hard to do. You have to have these people that kind of operate in the margins and in the shadows and connect person A to person B. And he's a guy who, as he builds up these contacts and expands his Rolodex, to use a term that probably the listeners know, but anybody under the age of 40 will not.
Your iPhone contact list. Okay.
Yes. Thank you. There you go. But, he wouldn't write down things on the iPhone contact list. Anyway, as that grows and as it develops, he collects it. He doesn't. Jeffrey Epstein, the other thing about him, I think that's interesting and underreported or under-remarked upon, and I think this is partly because of the aforementioned horrible, monstrous sex trafficking crimes. When he had his sort of more age-appropriate girlfriends before he met Ghislaine, like Ava Anderson, and even the woman Paula Hale, who he met Nick Lease through, and then Ghislaine herself. The people stuck around him and he stuck around them. He wasn't there. Sometimes people break up and then they don't talk to their exes ever again. He was not like that. He was a guy that they broke up with people, but he stayed around. So he was a connector in his personality. He never let people go, not in a horror movie way, but that just was his personality. And over time, all that stuff sort of accumulates and you're like, this guy knows everybody. And he always wanted to, go ahead.
You mentioned the underreported aspects of this. I want to get to the most underreported aspect of it. So at this point in the story, we're in the late 80s, early 90s. Epstein has established himself as a fixer, a nexus. Yeah. He's a connector. He knows how to move money. He knows how to protect dirty money. This obviously, and he's also at this point become connected to various intelligence agencies. This is where I think we have to bring the Russia connection in. And this is an area, per Jim Williams' earlier comment post here, this is an area where you have particular expertise, especially from your book, Dirty Rubles, which everyone should check out. I want to talk about the Russia aspect of this. Tell me a little bit about Semion Mogilevich. Why should people know that name? And how does he connect to Epstein?
Okay, so Mogilevich was, at the time, I think he's still alive. He's very old and lives in Moscow now. But at the time, this is now the 80s, basically early 80s, he's the head of the Russian mob. So he's like the Lucky Luciano of that world. And he is also very good at moving money around. That's what he is really good at. He's a mobster. He does mobster things, but he's good at the offshores and the financial networks and all that stuff. And Mogilevich, went into business with Robert Maxwell. This is per the Israel super spy Robert Maxwell book, which is very good and also worth checking out. Maxwell was similar to Epstein in a lot of ways. Another guy that's sort of in the middle and worked a lot of different angles and made himself indispensable, in a lot of ways. He started to go into business with Mogilevich later on in his tenure, maybe in the late 80s, something like that. And so that was the time when Mogilevich was doing a lot of sex trafficking. Once it hits 91, Soviet Union collapses. There's a lot of people suddenly who want to leave Eastern Europe and want to go to the United States. So there's this supply, for want of a better word, of people. There's a fresh group of people that are accessible to these horrible criminals. And Robert Maxwell and Mogilevich, I don't know what they were doing exactly, but they seem to be, Mogilevich for sure, Maxwell kind of involved with that world. Because one thing that is interesting about Epstein, and this is a guy named Thomas Hampson wrote this on his blog, so I don't want to say that it's my idea because it's not. He points out Epstein didn't do any child sex trafficking that we know of at all until Ghislaine came along. It wasn't until after he hooked up with her that started to go, that side of the business for him. He was doing other things. He was doing the offshores. He was doing the arms deal stuff. Then for a while, he was working for Stephen Hoffenberg and ran a big Ponzi scheme in London, which Hoffenberg went to prison for 18 years for, but Epstein magically never went to jail or wasn't charged. But he did that. Hoffenberg says that Epstein was actually the guy that ran the day-to-day operation of the Ponzi scheme, which makes sense, it tracks, right? So after that's when he meets Ghislaine. Robert Maxwell dies in 1991. In November of 1991, he falls off his yacht called the Lady Ghislaine off the coast of Gran Canary Island. Perhaps he was pushed. Perhaps he was killed and then thrown over. Nobody really knows. Ghislaine thinks that he was murdered. In the book that I referenced earlier, they say, yes, it was a Mossad, a Kadon hit. Doesn't really matter. He's dead. And suddenly there's this void because this guy isn't around to do this anymore.
Connect the thread then for us.
Yeah.
So Epstein is getting embedded, Mogilevich, Maxwell. And by the way, this is a total sidelight, but it does bring up this interesting point that you sort of floated a moment ago, that we have no evidence that he's involved in sex trafficking before his connection to Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yes.
And it raises this bizarre counterfactual where if he had not gone down that horrifying road, he might still to this day be engaged in the other horrifying road that we're focusing on today of being the center bullseye point in a giant target of moving dirty money, laundering money, connecting powerful people to other powerful people for who knows what kind of dirty business. And he might have gotten away with all of that and still been doing it. I want to bring Donald Trump into this, though, because another area of expertise for you is this exact same time frame. And I don't want to mix your work up with the work of Craig Unger, who's done a lot of fascinating research in this area. You've cited him before, but we know through the combination of his work and your work that at this exact same time and in this exact same geographical location, New York of the 80s, you have Donald Trump beginning to be actively cultivated by the KGB, hanging out at some bizarre electronics store, doing some weird money laundering there, having his real estate properties become the focus of Russian money laundering operations, going to Russia on a trip with mysterious purposes. And by the way, so is Epstein at the same time. Connect those threads. How do they intersect? How do they overlap?
It takes a little while. Trump knew Maxwell before. They were on yachts together. You could look it up in the sort of page 6 in the gossip columns. So they knew each other. Interestingly, Ivana and Robert Maxwell were both Czech, so they could speak Czech to each other if they wanted to. Just point there that I think is interesting. And then the cover story, or the sort of, not cover story, the official narrative is that Jeffrey and Ghislaine met in 1991 after Robert Maxwell died. I don't think that's true at all. I think he met Robert Maxwell before, even though Ghislaine told Todd Blanche that they didn't know each other before, which is just not true. And we know this because somebody writes about it in the birthday book and alludes to knowing Bob Maxwell and the Maxwell teenage daughter. This was in the 70s.
The same one with Trump's crayon
Yeah.
art.
That I get the title of my book, Another Wonderful Secret, comes from that. That's what Trump wrote in the birthday book. So that's all of this stuff is sort of coming together at this time. And then I'm not sure exactly how they met Trump and them. It just all got sucked into the thing. I think Ghislaine was really the initial mover and shaker. And then they're both in New York and they're both in Palm Beach and they both like to do horrible things. And eventually it's
a match made in hell.
Yes, exactly. And then they're partying together by the 80s. And Prince Andrew is also involved after a certain point, which is it. There's another thing about Epstein that's interesting is that he's able to trust watch himself because he knows these really important people. I tend to give a lot of people a pass if they have a couple emails in the files or whatever, because Kevin Spacey, for example, okay, he went on Epstein's plane to Africa, okay, on that humanitarian mission with Chris Tucker and with Bill Clinton, because he's friends with Bill Clinton. If you get called up and I say, Matt, hey, I'm going to this dinner at this really nice mansion on the Upper East Side. Bill Clinton will be there and Woody Allen and whoever else. You're not going to be like, I don't know, Greg, I would have to vet this guy. Sounds sus. You're going to be like, great. When do we leave? So over time, that equity builds up. And it becomes a thing where you're like, this guy has to be okay, right? He has to be okay. How could he not be okay? Clinton's on his plane. He's with Trump. He's with this person and that person. He's with Noam Chomsky. He's with Larry Summers. He's with Les Wexner, on and on.
And part of the point of this world is to be seen with these people, both because it's like a certain amount of star fucking. And it's also, there is that kind of reputational washing that happens. And let me tell you something, as a former congressional chief of staff, you get invitations to stuff with bigwigs all the time.
Yeah.
You accept, as long as they're not obvious criminals, or even if they're like maybe a little shady, but mostly okay, especially if they're former presidents, you mostly say yes. You mostly say yes to this kind of thing because that's what one does. So I see your point about Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey has other problems, but this isn't necessarily his
There's plenty of reasons to, but this is not one of them.
Yes.
He didn't do anything wrong on the plane that I'm aware of, and never went on it again. He just was on a humanitarian trip with his friend, who was the former president of the United States. So that's one example. But there's a lot of people that are like that just factor in once or twice, and then either they figure out what's up and they leave. I think Bill Clinton, in the statement that he put out through his press secretary, basically said, once the truth is known about him in 07, 08, the people that stopped talking to him at that time are different from the people that kept going. And he says, Clinton says, I stopped, and other people didn't. Yeah.
Right.
No, I haven't mentioned Trump. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, right. We're being prompted from Cynthia. So let's go there. Let's go back to Trump. We have a tremendous amount of evidence, and it would take too long to recount all of it. That Trump was rapidly becoming a Russian asset. That's a term of art. We could define it, but you could look it up in the dictionary, and it would show a picture of Tulsi Gabbard. A Russian asset is someone who may or may not be aware of the fact that they are useful to a foreign power.
Yeah.
And in this case, Trump was highly useful to a foreign power. This is very well established. We know from the Republican-controlled Senate Intelligence Report in 2018 that Russia viewed Trump as extremely useful to them and was actively trying to help him so that he would help them. This is not in dispute. I think the question is, to what degree was this intersection a conscious one on the part of the KGB, where they were co-cultivating Trump and Epstein and what each of those figures could do for them?
Yeah, I think my understanding of Epstein, and again, this might wind up not being 100% accurate because I'm just going by what I know, is that he served the same function that Robert Maxwell served, which is people would be like, who did he work for? He worked for the Russians. He worked for the Israelis. He worked for the CIA. He didn't work for any of those people. He worked for himself. He didn't give a shit about anything but himself. And he worked with all of those agencies, all of them, and governments in the Middle East, and John Brockman, the great literary agent to all the massive scientists and technology people with him. And I'm forgetting people, but there's so many different lanes that he was involved with. So to say that he's a tool of the Russians, I don't think that's not how I would frame. And I'm not saying that's what you said, but I don't think that's the proper frame. But he knew he was friends with people that were high up in the KGB and then later the FSB. He was communicating with these people on the regular, as was Robert Maxwell. And over time, that's what it is. I also think that Epstein probably knew more stuff than anybody in the United States. I don't know who would have known more about more things, top secret things that most people don't know than him in the United States anyway, just because he had so many connections and was privy to so many really secret conversations with people.
And I will say that there are people like this. There are benign versions of people like this that I have met in my time in politics, in government, who are just connected. They're the kinds of people who serve on transition panels for new presidents and who show up at events, and they're connectors. There are people I've worked with in my politics career who it's not even really clear what they do for a living. They're just professionally connected. They may have like a day job, but that's really a big part of what they do. And what you're laying out here is sort of the deeply malignant version of that. And the fact that with Epstein, there also came all of these intelligence connections to multiple intelligence services across countries, and especially the Russian one. Take us through a little bit what you mean by the financial side of this, because we obviously made the provocative assertion at the top that as horrifying as the trafficking aspect of what Epstein did was, it wasn't his main business. It wasn't his main focus. And it wasn't necessarily even the worst thing he did somehow. That's hard to imagine. But and I raise the example that you bring up in your articles in your 4-part series, that there were over $1 billion in suspicious transactions just at JPMorgan Chase alone. Could you walk us through, from your recollection? Obviously, you wrote all this 5 months ago and you're deep in the book, so you may not have every last fact and account detail at your fingertips, but just give us a general sense so that we understand what we're talking about in terms of what Epstein was doing for all these people. Where was that money coming from? Where was it going? What does it tell us about this larger question of what Epstein's real business was?
Nobody really knows exactly what the source of all of his money is. So let's start there. He got a lot of money from Les Wexner, for sure. He got a lot of money from Leon Black, for sure, for doing whatever it was he was doing. He made money for a while after he left Doug Leese. He was finding money for people. So he was making money that way. He was a wealth manager, which is, for want of a better word, for who knows what. There's some theories that after Iran-Contra, there was a lot of money in a slush fund that wound up not getting used. There's some thinking that he somehow got hold of that pile of cash. And then there's the trafficking aspect. Is not, you mentioned before, if he hadn't done what he did with that, he would still be doing this. I would say if he just stuck to trafficking women who were over the age of 18, he would still be doing it. I think it was just the fact that it was minors that I think that was the thing that really was the line for a lot of people, right? And that doesn't excuse it. It's a horrifying thing. But that operation is, I think Robert Maxwell was doing that. I don't know. Mogilevich was, and they were in business together. So that's why I think that. And again, we go back to the point about Ghislaine. Ghislaine didn't do this. Epstein didn't do this until Ghislaine showed up. For all we know, this is like a weird medieval marriage. And what the Ghislaine part of it is in the dowry is the entire sex trafficking operation.
When we speak about the KGB and the way they cultivate and control assets, we talk about the Russian term Kompromat, spelled with a K. When I hear you describe the operation that Epstein eventually set up, which involved this nexus of he knew people's secrets. You describe it in your articles as he was an indispensable man for them because he knew where their money was. People, as you described, people who are that wealthy, they don't know where their money is. They pay people to take care of it, especially if it's compromised money. You get a guy like Epstein to take care of that. So it's an interesting position you put yourself in vis-a-vis a figure like that who knows a lot of secrets for a lot of people. He knows your secrets. He knows your most vulnerable points. And then you layer on top of that this business that he gets into with Maxwell, where he's trafficking. And there are the same nexus of wealthy people, some of whom are involved in that. And it just, what you're portraying to me is this very odd double-edged sword that this world of wealth and privilege entered into. It's like the scene from Eyes Wide Shut, where you've got this incredible collection of people and they're all involved. And if you had the masks off, the one guy who knows who's under the mask for all these people is Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes.
It puts him in an incredibly powerful position. What do we know about what he did with that kind of power?
Yeah, we don't. He could do a lot of things. For one thing, you mentioned JPMorgan before. So let's stay with that for a second.
Yeah.
Sandia Labs, I just know what Alyssa's been writing about on that. Alyssa Valdez Rodriguez, that's good work that she's doing. JPMorgan, they enabled him because they allowed him to use the bank to take out these cash withdrawals for years and years. And they were supposed to file suspicious SARs, they're called, suspicious account reports. They didn't do it until after he was dead. And it was sus. And that was just one of the 5 big banks that he used. But the guy at JPMorgan is this guy named Jess Staley. Jess stands for, I think, is it James Edward Staley? So it's his initials, Jess, like Job on Arrested Development, right? Or Jeb Bush.
Gob Bluth, yeah.
Yeah, Gob Bluth, exactly. He's like Jamie Dimon's number 2 for a long time, or was for many years, and was in charge of the super wealthy group. And he seems to be really have been glamored by Epstein. He writes after he gets out of jail something like, oh, we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder like the Greek warriors of old, or some stupid thing like that. And as long as Staley was there at JPMorgan, Epstein could pretty much do whatever he wanted. What's interesting is that Jamie Dimon said in his deposition that he had never met Epstein, never talked to Epstein, didn't really even know who Epstein was until after the fact, which, if true, it's either not true because you're the CEO of this micromanaging CEO of this vast bank. You have a guy who's actively bringing you clients and bringing millions of dollars into the operation because he was doing that. And he's a guy, Epstein was, who wanted to meet everyone all the time. So Epstein was like, hey, I want to meet Jamie Dimon. And also lived a 20-minute walk away from him in New York City and ran in all the same circles, but they never met once in 15 years. Okay. All right. That's what he says. So if that's true, that means that Jess Staley was really good at insulating it and keeping it on the down low and making damn sure that those two people never met.
And look, while we're kind of correcting the record here, I'd also like to correct the record because I misspoke a moment ago. And thank you to Kinky Streets for pointing this out, that the movie Eyes Wide Shut wasn't fiction. You're right. I should have said that documentary Eyes Wide Shut. And I do regret the error.
Now, Eyes Wide Shut is actually based on a novella that was written in, I think, Austria in 1906. Almost
dream novella.
exactly.
Yes.
Stunningly accurate.
Stunningly accurate.
Yeah, well, I'm so stunningly faithful. His Fidelio is the past.
They got my mask wrong in the movie, but oh wait, never mind. Let's move on. Let's get to today and the Epstein files. Kash Patel spending $850,000 of FBI overtime money on kegs of his whiskey. I'm sorry, on redacting names from the Epstein files unsuccessfully, because it's like big black markers. It's don't look here. Whatever you don't look at the T_P part of this. But obviously they're nervous, right? They're very scared of something. And I floated at the top of this that I wonder if it's really the trafficking part of this, because in a way, we already know this. Now, that presents kind of two questions that I really want to ask you about. One is, and you can take these in any order you want. One is, if it's not the trafficking connection to Trump that he's most scared of, what is in there that he's most scared of? That's one question. An equally important question, and I'm sorry, I'm going to issue a trigger warning for this. I don't believe in trigger warnings, but this is such a weighty topic that I'm actually going to bring one up. There are people writing wonderfully today, importantly today, about the very clear evidence that exists that Trump was involved with a minor through Epstein. And you say that the New York Times claim that no Epstein victims have accused Trump directly is not true, is flatly not true. Yeah. So maybe that is the connection that he's most afraid of. So those are my two questions. Take them in either order that you want.
The answer to the first question is I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. So one of the things that I tried to do in this piece at the end, the last chapter, is try to figure it out. Like, just if this is a movie and we're in the writers' room,
what could he be most afraid of?
Yeah. What is it? If it's not that, because I think you're right. Everyone knows, like, his base is not going to turn on him for that. They're going to be like, cool, she looked like she was 18. Girl. It'll be something like that. And they'll just forget about it in an hour. That's not the thing that he's worried about, I don't think. And then it goes down this path of then what could it be? So the 5th chapter of the book and tackles that question. I have my theories personally, but I try to lay out everything that I could think of using my novelist training. And again, I don't know, not even speculating. I'm just literally brainstorming things that it could be that would be quote unquote worse. And there are things that would be worse, where lots of people get killed, or treasonous on such a level that it's stunning, something COVID related. There's lots of things that could be worse that would make even the staunchest MAGA be like, oh my God, oh wow, oh no, we can't do that. And it may be one of those things, or it may not. It may just be that he doesn't want. It may be he knows there's one picture of him where he looks bad, where he's doing something, and he doesn't want it to come out. I don't think so. I think he's way too cagey about it all. He's had Todd Blanche now. Pam Bondi couldn't do the thing that he wanted him to do. Now Blanche is there. He's very nice to Ghislaine all the time. There's very few people he's that nice to. Putin, Ghislaine, and Jared. Those three.
Right. And it goes back to the point of just how much power Epstein wielded. He knows, and you're suggesting it could be quite literally where the bodies are buried.
Yeah.
And this, by the way, I should tease that your book, what is the name of your book?
My book is called Another Wonderful Secret, Infrequently Asked Questions About Jeffrey Epstein.
You're going to hear more about it if you subscribe to Greg's Substack, the information for which is up on the screen. So we don't really know.
We're just guessing.
And the answer to the first question.
It's right. What was the second question?
So the second one is, we just have to talk about the fact that the Times claims that no Epstein victim has directly accused Donald Trump of raping them. And Like I find this so difficult to talk about, and I'm not trying to euphemize. I'm not trying to like paper over the ugliness of this. I just literally find it hard to say out loud.
It's really awful. It's
really,
monstrous,
really hard to deal with.
and
But let's just devote at least some time to talking about this. There is credible evidence that is absolutely not true, and you address some of that.
Yeah, we don't know, and there's one of the things that's frustrating about the release of the files is that there's a lot of things in there that are just FBI reports of people calling up on the phone and they write the stuff down, which doesn't mean that it's probably not true. The story about him throwing the baby into the lake that's not true. I don't think. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. And the other story about, he was in Oklahoma and he with the spike in no. But the Katie Johnson testimony, that's a pseudonym for one of the accusers. She filed a case in California and then another one in Florida in 2016 when he was running the first time. And there's a video, I assume it's still on YouTube, where her face is covered so you can't see her, where she's talking about what happened to her when she was 13. And there was another girl with her named Maria in the telling who was 12. And those are cases that, first of all, it's her and someone else that corroborate the story. And 2 different lawyers signed up to do it. So the attorneys believed there was enough there to sign on to the case and invest their time into the case. I think that's important because there's a lot of lawsuits where that's not what's happening. And all it would take is that she gets scared or they pay her off or whatever and it goes away. But that doesn't make it not true. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. So, and again, I don't know that's true, but to me, it's credible. And there's another case also that people are talking about. I think it's Jane Doe 4, I want to say. There's a lot of Jane Does, I apologize, that also involves Trump that the FBI investigated a lot. So you have 2 at least of these cases. What's interesting about the Katie Johnson testimony, and this is something that she said happened again in February of 2016, which is before Access Hollywood. It's before he even won the primary the first time around. Okay. She said that Maria, this girl who was with her, is Hispanic, and Trump, she claims, went into this weird kind of harangue about how he wanted like immigration called on her and they were going to come get her and drag her out or something like that. And again, in 2016, it doesn't mean anything, but now it's like, that's what he has ICE doing in the entire country. That thing that she described as a sexual fantasy in this lawsuit in 2016 is what Noam and these other people were doing here for real. So that stuck out to me. There's details in her thing that were like, yeah, that tracks. I believe that would happen. And listening to her, she sounds credible. So that doesn't mean that it's true. Maybe it's been debunked. I don't know. I wasn't there. It's hard to know. But there's no way, the idea that he went to a party where it was him, a calendar girl party, where it was him and Epstein and a bunch of girls.
And to your point about ICE, and this is a point that Laura Brandon, wow, me read English good. Laura Brandon is bringing up in the chat that there's a Melania aspect to this, which of course came up with her very weird press conference a few weeks ago. No one bring up Epstein files. And it's like, why are you talking about this, Melania? I don't know. And stop asking. That was another question about the Epstein file. It's so panicky strange. And there is a backstory involved there, which again, I won't belabor and I don't have all the details at my fingertips, but that also involves calling ICE, deportation, and weaponizing the government power to take care of people, to get rid of people who could implicate the Trumps in the whole Epstein horrifying saga. I want to get to kind of the final set of questions here, which may be the most important. You've described Epstein as infrastructure. He's sort of a whole system, not just a person. He's a system for Kompromat and dirty money and intelligence operations spanning decades. Does that infrastructure still exist in some form today?
I would think so. Yeah. Again, in this case, we have to separate the sex trafficking from everything else. Everything else is there. There are still people that are doing networking that know a lot of people. There's a guy named Ian Osborne, who's British, who's 41, 42 years old. Again, one of these guys, there's very few pictures of him. He was behind the scenes, who Epstein ingratiated himself in with a billionaire, in his case, Michael Bloomberg, and opened his Rolodex and filled it up. And long after Epstein was already a known pedophile, was trying to work into the good graces and apparently succeeded, and went back and forth with him and talked about a lot of things that introduced Epstein to Peter Thiel based on the context clues in the files, which I talk about in the book. So that's a guy that if I set it up that way, if I described him to you without telling you who it was, you would guess that it was Epstein. Now, he doesn't have anything to do with sex trafficking. In fact, seems like, as far as that goes, from based again on the emails, seems like actually not a bad guy. But and being a connector for powerful people isn't inherently bad either. I should also say that. But it can be. It can be if you're doing arms deals and stuff under the radar and this and that. And then you have Jared. What's Jared up to? I don't know. Why is Jared negotiating in Iran on our behalf? Why is he in Gaza? What's up with Jared?
Great minds think alike. Commenter Cynthia Rice, one of our good friends here on the show, asking that question. What is Jared up to? He seems to have a day job. What is the rest of it? We know what Trump's sons are doing. They're running around the country and the world cutting dirty cryptocurrency deals for which they may be prosecutable, and more on that at another time. But it is interesting that Jared has slid into this role. There are a lot of people that are in Trump's orbit who seem to be all too willing to take up this mantle of they have a connection over here in this country that also Russia has a lot of connections. There's a lot of money flowing. They get a little piece of that money. And of course, all of this goes through the exact same FBI office in New York, where it turns out the head of that office was actually working for the Russians and was also behind the suppression of the New York Times story and saying on the eve of the 2016 election that there was no evidence of ties between Trump and Russia. Yeah. And there's a lot of weird connections going on there. That's all I'll say.
There's a lot of weird connections. And this is not the powers that be. We've grown up watching these movies and reading these books, and like the Eyes Wide Shut thing. There's this secret cabal of rich people. Like when I was listening to you set up, which you did a great job of, the whole Epstein story. If I was playing this in 1993, I'd be like, what movie is this from? This isn't true. This is bullshit. But that's where we are. I forget who said this. One of these research writers said, hey, you can't call it conspiracy theory. You have to call the opposite of it coincidence theory, which meaning, is it really just a coincidence? I don't know. It doesn't seem like a lot of these things are coincidental. And again, it just gets down to what is it that they're hiding? And I think that's the key. And if we can get to that level of what it is they're hiding and take it out into the open and throw some sunlight at it, like a vampire, it will shrivel and die. And then we can move on. But until we can do that, I don't think we can. I just don't think we can.
And you also bring up from that documentary, The Lost Boys, that in order to get rid of the vampire infestation, you have to kill the head vampire. Yes. And I don't think that we have a beat on that yet. Jeffrey Epstein died under mysterious circumstances. But as much as I've portrayed him here, and you've even better portrayed him in your 4-part investigative series as this malignant spider sitting at the center of a web of dirty money and deceit, he's not the head guy. He's not running things. He's a connector. He's a nexus, but he's not calling the shots. And there's obviously a lot of concern that Trump is one of the people calling the shots. There's a lot of concern that the oligarchs around Vladimir Putin are calling the shots. And that's really where I want to end up with you on all of this. I've already called for speculation on, is there some kind of an ongoing infrastructure still in existence after the demise of Jeffrey Epstein that's fulfilling the same function for these same people? But I also want to get you to speculate on, look, you've been writing about Trump and Russia since 2018. Your book, Dirty Rubles, was ahead of its time, ahead of almost everyone on this.
Thank you.
You know the connection points, you know the Epstein story inside and out. Where does this end? Where is all this going? What is this all going to look like 2 years from now, 5 years from now?
No outcome would surprise me. And I mean that, really. It could be that we really do find stuff out and we're able to prosecute people and everything ends happily. My guess is if this was a movie, a good movie, there would be some little thing that was revealed so that somebody could take the fall and everything would just keep right on chugging along and we'd never know. And it's based on what history teaches us. There's a lot of things we're just never going to know. But there's the world is changing right now. Like the geopolitics of the world that have been the same more or less since 1945 are suddenly shifting. It's like tectonic plates moving. Now, we get rid of Trump by impeachment or if, I don't know, blood clot or whatever, and we get back to being a democracy and the leader of the free world again, we go right back into it as much as we can. But for right now, we're drifting into being allies with Putin and with China and with Bibi. That's the sort of nexus in opposition to Canada and Europe and Mexico and Australia and all our other traditional allies. How does that look? What does that mean down the line? And how does that affect this? Because it's not just, there's a lot of people know the truth about stuff, I think. There's a lot of intelligence services that are very good at what they do. And at some point, it may behoove somebody to drop something out there into the wild that'll blow the door off stuff. And that's what we're waiting for, I think. I think we're waiting for some credible source to let us know what's going on. But in the meantime, he's pretty successfully gotten the spotlight off of the story, invading Iran and starting a national precipice before the hyperinflation crisis will do that. And then you have to ask yourself, this is so bad that he's willing to do that? What is it then?
What is it then?
Yeah.
I don't want to end on a dour note. I always like to end with some uplift, and I'm gonna do that. I do want to start though with a slightly dour note that, you know, I think we do have a lot of unknowns here, and this is one of the services that I think you're providing in your Substack deep dive and in this forthcoming book is you're quipping in your article, and we made reference to it at the top, that there's an aspect to all of this that people's eyes glaze over. And the reason I wanted to dive into a little bit of the detail here is just to give people a sense that there's a lot of there down in the muck, and it's worth understanding. If no one documents it and raises the questions and puts what we know out in plain sight, then it really will pass like a river of sewage under our noses, like it did for so long. And it's been very disquieting for this imagined world of wealth and privilege and power and money and crime to have come to light and to have been shown to be very real and very dangerous and really disgusting. By the way, for those of us who are Jewish, I don't love the fact that the guy who was running all of this happens to be Jewish. It's the worst aspect of this. It's unleashed all kinds of anti-Semitism that I can't stand. So thanks for that, Jeffrey, you all-time hellion. But look, I think the turn to the slightly more positive of this is I just wrote an article on Substack that there's a lot of mounting evidence that the authoritarians are running into a wall. We're seeing tremendous pushback, and I'll put this up on the banner. People should, I hope, check out worthknowing.substack.com. Please come subscribe. There's a lot of mounting evidence that Netanyahu is running into an electoral brick wall. His coalition is collapsing. Putin is running into a brick wall. Dan Perry, the former lead editor for the Associated Press for Europe, just speculate. He says intelligent people he knows, people in the know, top-level analysts are saying Putin may not last the year because the oligarchs around him may have had enough. Trump is running into vast electoral troubles. Maybe he is practicing the rotating credit card debt of scandal version of trying to suppress the Epstein story by creating war and an economic catastrophe. Who knows? But it is starting to catch up with him. And unless he overtly subverts the elections, which could happen,
they're trying.
They're trying.
Sure trying. Yeah.
He looks to be on track to a major electoral defeat. Xi Jinping is running into trouble. Who knew? I put this in my Substack. Who knew that there had been major economic protests going on in China? So the point is, there is a pushback here. We
Oh,
are
yeah.
on the verge of converting into a kleptocracy on the way to autocracy, but the people are fighting back. We are at a kind of an inflection point where we can still claw things back from the edge. And anyway, I think that your book and your articles on Substack are providing an important public service for understanding just how much corruption is flowing under our feet at all times and letting us see it so that we can fight back against it. So the book is coming up. I'm going to urge people to subscribe. Here are your previous books.
Yep.
I'm going to urge people to subscribe to, oh shoot, that's my YouTube. Look what I just did there. What I was going to urge people to subscribe to, if people like the good hang that we're having here, which is substantive and entertaining and interesting, you've got an awesome YouTube show on Fridays. It's a little tipsy. It's not for teetotalers, but it is really awesome. And people can subscribe to your Substack to hear all. When is the book coming out?
It's out. It came out yesterday. It's
yesterday. Oh my gosh, we're so timely.
Today? Yeah, no, you timed it great. It couldn't have been better.
Oh my gosh.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
So I hope people will march out to find that. And look, I know that this is a disturbing topic, but it's important. I appreciate people engaging with it. And Greg, thanks so much for being on.
It's always great to see you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for watching, guys.
And in the meantime, we have another great guest, another fascinating conversation coming up next Tuesday. So subscribe. And in the meantime, hang in there. Stay safe. Be well. We'll see you next week.